He stood in the shadows while the whole world sang his words. Picture two voices locked in perfect harmony, a love that looked unbreakable. You know the song Solid. It plays at every wedding. It hums in the background of every black family reunion. But the man holding that microphone had a journey that started long before the applause. Born in Fairfield, South Carolina, in 1941, he faced a world designed to break him. But wait, it gets deeper. He carried the heavy weight of segregation on his small shoulders. His father worked until his back gave out. His mother held the house together with prayer and grit. When they moved to Harlem, the city pulse beat against his ribs. Gospel music shook the floorboards of the church. He absorbed it all. He was not a prodigy with a silver spoon. He was a survivor. He scraped for money. He searched for a purpose. Here is the question. Why does the world remember the song but forget the struggle? Why is his name not always carved in stone beside the giants he created like Marvin Gaye and Diana Ross? This is the story of Nick Ashford. The climb was steep, and the silence left behind is loud. The red clay of South Carolina tells a story. It holds the heat of the sun. It holds the sweat of the people who work the land. And in 1941, it held the first cries of a boy named Nicholas Ashford. Fairfield was not an easy place. The world was split in two, black and white, rich and poor. Nick landed on the hard side of that line. He did not wake up in silk sheets. He woke up to the sound of roosters and the heavy silence of the country. His father knew hard work. He knew the kind of labor that bends a back. He worked long hours. The sun came up and he worked. The sun went down and he worked. He gave his body to the job so his family could eat. His mother was the anchor. She had grit. She had a spine made of steel. She held the Ashford family together when the money ran out. And the money often ran out. They lived with dignity. But dignity does not fill a stomach. It does not pay the rent. The weight of segregation pushed down on them. It was a heavy blanket that never lifted. You could feel it in the air. You could see it in the eyes of the elders. But the Ashford family had a plan. They looked north. Picture the train ride. The wheels clicked against the steel tracks. The green fields of the south faded away. The air changed. The smell of pine turned into the smell of smoke and city steam. They were part of a great movement. Families packed their lives into bags and headed for a new promise. They landed in Harlem, New York. Harlem in the 1940s was alive. It was not just a place on a map. It was a heartbeat. It was a drum. The streets buzzed with energy. The Harlem Renaissance had just passed, but the magic still hung in the air. You could taste it. Nick walked these streets. He saw the men in sharp suits. He saw the women in their Sunday best. He heard music pouring out of every window. Jazz spilled from the basement clubs. Doo-wop harmonies echoed on the street corners. It was a symphony of the city. But here is the deal. Harlem was loud, but Nick was quiet. He was a skinny kid. He looked at this big, fast world with wide eyes. School was a battle. He did not fit in easily. The lessons on the chalkboard did not speak to him. The numbers and the dates felt cold. He felt like a stranger in a crowded room. Money remained a ghost. It appeared and then vanished. The family scraped by. There were no extras, no luxuries. Nick learned the value of $1 before he learned how to drive. He saw the hustle. He saw the grind. He needed a place to breathe. He found it in the church. Step inside with him for a moment. Close your eyes. Smell the wood polish on the pews. Feel the heat of the bodies packed together. Sunday morning was not just a routine. It was a rescue mission. The choir stood up. The organ hummed low and deep, and then the sound exploded. Voices rose to the ceiling. They shouted. They clapped. They stomped their feet until the floorboards shook. This was the gospel. Nick sat there, and something hit him in the chest. It was not just noise. It was power. He saw how a song could change a face. He saw women enter with tears in their eyes and leave with a smile. He saw men enter with heavy shoulders and leave standing tall. Music healed the room. That seed planted itself deep in his gut. He realized that words had power. A melody could lift a soul. A lyric could save a life. He started to dream. But dreams in Harlem can be dangerous. They can break your heart. Nick tried to find his path. He was not a prodigy. No one handed him a microphone and a contract. He had to fight for every inch. He tried different jobs. He used his hands. He used his back. But nothing felt right. He looked at his own body. He was thin. He was agile. He thought about dance. Picture him in a dusty room. He stretches his limbs. He tries to move with the rhythm. He thought maybe his feet could tell his story. He wanted to be a dancer. He poured his energy into movement. He wanted to leap over his circumstances. But the world of dance is cruel. It demands perfection. It demands money for lessons. It demands connections. Nick had passion, but passion does not open every door. He kept searching. He hung around theaters. He stood in the back shadows. He watched the performers on stage. He listened to records until the grooves wore smooth. He studied the greats. He dissected the songs. He wanted to know how they did it. How did they take pain and turn it into gold? He walked the blocks of Harlem at night. The city lights flashed on the wet pavement. He felt a fire inside him, but he had nowhere to put it. He was a vessel full of water with no cup to pour it into. He was lonely. The creative life is a lonely road. You hear a song in your head that no one else can hear. You see a vision that no one else can see. Nick Ashford was a young man with a heart full of love songs, but he was singing them to the wind. He faced rejection. He faced empty pockets. He faced the cold reality of a city that eats dreamers for breakfast. Gravity pulls hardest right before you fly. Nick was on the edge. He had the talent. He had the drive. He had the soul of a poet and the grit of his mother. But he was missing one thing. He was singing a solo in a world built for duets. He did not know that his destiny was walking around the same city, looking for him. He did not know that the voice that would complete him was just around the corner. The silence of his struggle was loud, but the music was about to begin. Here's the deal. Destiny often hides in plain sight. For Nick Ashford, destiny sat at a piano bench in the White Rock Baptist Church in Harlem. It was 1964. Nick walked in looking for a meal and a prayer. He found Valerie Simpson instead. She was small, but her voice held the power of a hurricane. Her fingers danced over the ivory keys. Nick watched her. He listened. The connection snapped into place like a magnet finding steel. He was the poet. She was the musician. He had the lyrics floating in his head. She had the melodies to ground them. They were two halves of the same whole. They started working together immediately, but do not think the doors swung wide open. The music business is a fortress. They had to pick the lock. They sold their first batch of songs for pennies. They wrote Let's Go Get Stoned for Ray Charles. It hit #1 on the R&B charts in 1966. That song was a monster. It played on every jukebox from Chicago to New Orleans. But Nick and Valerie did not get rich. They got a foot in the door. That door led them to Detroit. Picture the Motor City in the late 60s. Smoke rose from the factories. Cars rolled off the assembly lines. And at Motown Records, hits rolled off the tape machines. Berry Gordy signed them. He saw the fire in their eyes. They entered the studio with a mission. They were not just writing songs. They were crafting legends. Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell stood at the microphone. Nick and Valerie stood behind the glass. They coached them. They pushed them. They wrote Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Listen to that song in your head right now. The bass line walks. The drums kick. The voices climb higher and higher. It is pure joy. It feels like flying. That song did not just climb the charts. It became part of the American DNA. They followed it with You're All I Need to Get By. They wrote Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing. They handed Marvin and Tammy hit after hit. Nick and Valerie were the architects of a golden era. They built the sound that made the world dance. Then came the biggest test, Diana Ross left the Supremes. The world wondered if she could survive alone. Nick and Valerie stepped up. They took Ain't No Mountain High Enough and flipped it. They slowed it down. They made it 6 minutes long. They added spoken word. It was risky. It was dramatic. It was a masterpiece. It sent Diana Ross straight to #1. The money started to flow. The royalties poured in like rain. But Nick was not satisfied. He was tired of the background. He was tired of giving his best words to other men. He looked at Valerie. He knew they had something the world needed to see. They stepped out from behind the curtain. They became Ashford and Simpson. The critics were skeptical. They said songwriters should stay in the studio. Nick ignored them. He was tall. He was handsome. He grew his hair long. He wore silk shirts open to the chest. He looked like a star. And then 1984 arrived. The beat dropped. The drum machine snapped. The synthesizer hummed. Solid. You know the video. Nick and Valerie in the park. The chemistry was electric. They looked at each other with real love. They sang Solid as a Rock. It was an anthem for every couple trying to make it work. It played at every wedding. It played at every family reunion. It blasted from car windows in every city. The song went gold. The album flew off the shelves. Now, picture the life they built. They moved to Westport, Connecticut. They bought a massive estate. It was a palace. It had green lawns that stretched for acres. It had high gates. It was a long way from the dusty roads of South Carolina. It was a long way from the cramped apartment in Harlem. They threw parties that people still talk about. Celebrities filled the rooms. Champagne flowed. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Nick Ashford was the king of the castle. He drove luxury cars. He wore furs. He lived the life that most people only see in movies. But this success meant something deeper for the community. Nick and Valerie owned their publishing. That is the secret sauce. Many artists in the 60s and 70s lost their rights. They signed bad deals. They died broke while the record labels got rich. Not Nick. He was smart. He kept the ownership. Every time I'm Every Woman played on the radio, Nick got paid. Every time a movie used their songs, the check cleared. They built generational wealth. They showed the world that Black artists could be bosses. They could own the factory, not just work on the line. They opened a sugar bar in New York City. It was their playground. It was a place where music lived. Legends walked in the door. Maya Angelou sat at a table. Stevie Wonder played the piano. Nick greeted everyone with a smile. He was the host. He was the star. He was the survivor who won. The awards piled up. The Songwriters Hall of Fame came calling. The industry bowed down. Life felt perfect. The music was loud. The love was real. The bank accounts were full. But here is the thing about reaching the peak of the mountain. The air gets thin. The climb takes a toll on the body. You push and push to get to the top, and sometimes you forget that the human heart has limits. Nick looked invincible. He moved with the grace of a dancer. He sang with the power of a preacher. But inside, the biological clock was ticking. The crowds cheered. The lights blinded them. They stood hand in hand, soaking in the glory of a lifetime of work. While the world saw a smile, the shadows were growing. The silence was waiting for its turn to speak. The lights dimmed. The party ended. For decades, Nick Ashford looked like he had beaten the game. He had the money. He had the fame. He had the woman. He had the respect of the streets and the adoration of the sweets. When you saw him at the sugar bar in New York City, he looked eternal. He wore his fedoras with a tilt. He flashed that $1 million smile. He moved through the crowd like a king surveying his court. But time is a thief that never gets caught. Here is the heartbreaking truth about the human body. It does not care how many records you sold. It does not care that you wrote the anthem for Marvin Gaye. It does not care that you are half of the most solid couple in music history. Biology is cold. It is a machine that eventually breaks down. The fall did not happen with a scandal. There were no flashing police lights. There were no handcuffs. There were no headlines about bankruptcy or betrayal. Nick Ashford was too smart for that. He protected his legacy. He protected his family. But he could not protect his cells. Picture the irony. Here was a man who made his fortune with his voice. His throat was his instrument. It was the vessel for the lyrics that changed the world. And that is exactly where the enemy attacked. It started quietly, a tickle in the throat, a voice that felt a little more tired than usual after a show. Maybe he thought it was just age. Maybe he thought it was the strain of a lifetime of singing. He was nearly 70 years old. He had been working without a break since he was a skinny kid in Harlem. But the diagnosis was not fatigue, it was throat cancer. The room spins when a doctor says that word. The air gets sucked out of the space. Suddenly, the gold records on the wall do not matter. The mansion in Connecticut feels very big and very empty. Nick Ashford faced a new kind of mountain. This was not a mountain high enough to climb. This was a valley low and dark. He kept it quiet. That was his way. He did not want pity. He did not want the tabloids speculating on his life. He wanted to be remembered for the music, not the sickness. He continued to show up. He continued to smile, but those close to him saw the changes. The suits hung a little looser on his frame. The energy was a little lower. The light in his eyes was fighting a battle against a creeping shadow. He underwent treatment, radiation, chemo, the things that strip a man of his strength to save his life. Imagine the physical toll. The man who danced across stages worldwide now had to fight to walk down a hallway. The voice that roared solid was reduced to a whisper. Valerie stood by him. She was his rock now. The roles reversed. He had carried the lyrics. Now she carried the hope. She held his hand through the treatments. She managed the silence that grew in their home. But the cancer was aggressive. It was a fire that would not be put out. August 2011 arrived. The summer heat in New York was heavy. The air was thick. Nick entered New York Presbyterian Hospital. The sterile smell of the hospital replaced the sweet scent of his cologne. The beeping of monitors replaced the rhythm of the drums. He was surrounded by family. The circle was tight. But even with all that love in the room, dying is a solitary act. You have to walk that final bridge alone. On August 22nd, 2011, the music stopped. Nick Ashford took his last breath. He was 70 years old. The news hit the world like a physical blow. It rippled through Harlem. It shook Detroit. It crossed the ocean. People checked their phones and refused to believe it. Nick Ashford, gone. It seemed impossible. He was so full of life. He was the definition of vitality. But the silence left behind was deafening. Think about Valerie Simpson in that moment. Picture her standing in the hospital room. For nearly 50 years, they had been a single entity, Ashford and Simpson. You never said one name without the other. They were two notes in the same chord. Now, the chord was broken. She had to walk out of that hospital alone. She had to go back to the big house in Connecticut alone. She had to look at the piano where they wrote their hits and see the empty bench next to her. The funeral was a testament to his impact. The tears were real. The industry did not just lose a songwriter, they lost a statesman. They lost an example of Black excellence. They lost a man who showed them how to own their art and love their wives. But the tragedy of his fall is not just about death. It is about the unfinished melody. Nick had more to give. He had more wisdom to share. He was the elder statesman that young artists looked up to. When he died, a library of knowledge burned down. The stories of the old Harlem, the secrets of the Motown studio, the formula for a love that lasts 5 decades, it all went with him. The sugar bar stayed open, but the atmosphere changed. You could feel the missing piece. Patrons would look at the door, half expecting him to walk in with a fedora and a smile, but the door stayed closed. The fall of Nick Ashford reminds us of the fragility of it all. You can build a castle. You can write the songs that the whole world sings. You can have a love that is solid as a rock, but you are still made of flesh and bone. The silence he left is loud. It screams across the decades. It asks a question that has no answer. Why do the best voices leave us so soon? The song ended. But the echo lasts forever. The news hit the streets like a cold wind on a hot summer day. It was August 22nd, 2011. Phones buzzed in pockets. News tickers scrolled across television screens. The headline was short, but it felt heavy. Nick Ashford was dead. People stopped on the sidewalks of Harlem. They stared at the screens in the windows of electronic stores. It did not seem real. Nick Ashford was the man with the smile. He was the man with the energy. He was the man who sang about a love that was solid as a rock. How could a rock crumble? But here's the twisted part about fame. The moment he took his last breath, the world suddenly remembered how much they loved him. Radio stations that had not played his music in years suddenly filled the airwaves. You could not walk past a barbershop or a grocery store without hearing Ain't No Mountain High Enough. The tributes poured in. Celebrities went on television. They wore black. They cried. They told stories about his kindness. They called him a genius. They called him a legend. But you have to ask the hard question. Where was this noise when he was alive? For years, the industry treated Nick Ashford like a relic. They respected him, sure, but they often left him in the past. They celebrated the singers who sang his songs, but they forgot the man who wrote the words. They gave the awards to the front man while the architect stood in the back. Death changes the conversation. Suddenly, everyone claimed they knew his greatness all along. It is a strange hypocrisy. We wait until a heart stops beating to give a man his flowers. We wait until the ears are deaf to sing his praises. But while the public posted messages online, a real tragedy unfolded behind closed doors. Picture Valerie Simpson. The cameras flashed at the funeral. The crowds lined the streets. But when the sun went down, Valerie had to go home. For nearly 50 years, she was never just Valerie. She was Ashford and Simpson. She was the melody to his lyric. She was the right hand to his left. Now, she was a solo act in a duet world. She looked at the piano bench. It was empty on one side. She looked at the microphone stand. It stood alone. The silence in that big house in Connecticut was louder than any applause. She had to learn how to breathe again. She had to learn how to walk into a room without him. The press asked her what she would do next. They asked if she would retire. They asked if the music was over. But remember what Nick built. He did not just leave her with memories. He left her with a fortress. Because Nick Ashford was smart, he owned his publishing. He owned the rights to the songs that the whole world sang. When the radio stations played the tributes, the royalties came in. When the movies used his tracks, the estate got paid. Nick proved that a black artist could build a kingdom that survived death. He did not leave his wife to struggle. He left her with power. The Sugar Bar in New York became a place of pilgrimage. Fans traveled from Europe and Japan just to stand in the room where he used to hold court. They wanted to touch the wood. They wanted to feel the vibration. Valerie eventually went back to the piano. She played the chords. She sang the songs. But the audience saw the difference. They saw the strength of a woman carrying a legacy on her own back. The years passed. The initial shock faded. The headlines moved on to the next tragedy. But the gap remained. The music industry changed. It became digital. It became fast. The art of the slow-cooked love song began to disappear. We realized what we lost. We lost the kind of songwriter who lived the life he sang about. We lost the example of a man who could be a star and a husband at the same time. Nick Ashford's death forced us to look in the mirror. It forced us to see that we often take our giants for granted. We assume they will be there forever. We assume the song will never end. But the record always stopped spinning eventually. The world kept turning. The sun came up over Harlem. The train still rattled into the city. But the soul of the music felt a little lighter. The bottom end of the harmony was gone. Nick Ashford showed us that you can come from nothing and build everything. He showed us that love is real. And in the end, He showed us that even when the singer leaves the stage, the melody hangs in the air forever. The news broke on August 22nd, 2011. It hit the streets like a physical blow. Nick Ashford was gone. Throat cancer took the voice that gave the world its best love songs. He was 70 years old. But here is the thing about a true legend. You can bury the man, but you cannot bury the music. The moment he passed, the radio stations woke up. They filled the airwaves with his genius. You heard Ain't No Mountain High Enough in the grocery store. You heard Solid blasting from car windows in Harlem. The world suddenly realized how much they owed this skinny kid from South Carolina. Picture Valerie Simpson in the days after the funeral. She faced a silence that was louder than any crowd. The piano bench had an empty space. The other half of the duet was gone, but Nick did not leave her stranded. He left her with power. Remember the business moves he made. He fought to keep his publishing rights. He owned the songs. That means every time a movie uses their track, the check clears. Every time a wedding DJ plays their hit, the estate gets paid. Nick Ashford built a fortress of generational wealth. He showed the world that a black artist could be the boss of his own creation. He did not just leave a memory. He left a blueprint. The Sugar Bar in New York City keeps the lights on. The music still spills out onto the street. Fans still come to touch the history. The physical body of Nick Ashford is at rest, but his spirit is working overtime. Think about your own life for a second. How many times did his words lift you up? Maybe you fell in love to his lyrics. Maybe you danced at a family reunion while his beat played. He wrote the soundtrack for our joy. He took the pain of the Jim Crow South and turned it into a symphony of love. He proved that you can start with nothing and end up with everything. He was a husband. He was a father. He was a giant. He stood tall so others could climb on his shoulders. The charts might change, the trends might fade, but the foundation he built is solid, solid as a rock. Some stories end without closure, but dignity doesn't need applause. Which Ashford and Simpson song holds a special place in your memory? Do you remember where you were when you first heard Solid? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Like and subscribe for more stories about the legends who paved the way.